Hello, everyone. I have had two fits and starts, so I'm just going to be 100% honest and let you all know that this is my third time trying to do this presentation. The first time was in the gather space with my two dear friends who showed up to support me, and we did a little bit of a grounding exercise and an overview. Then I went to record everything and got about 30 minutes in and realized that the recording software I was using only did 15 minutes of it. So I'm just allowing this to be what it is. And I'm finally going to record this as a webinar to give to whomever finds it and whomever it serves. So for those of you who signed up for the replay, you are getting this exclusively first. And then it's going to be available on YouTube as just information for people to know. So we are going to get started with the content. My name is Carrie Rohrbach-Myers. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder of Empowering Educator, LLC. This workshop is on accessing educator self-care to know why it's so hard and what to do about it. We're going to begin with a brief grounding and centering exercise. First thing you need to do is just check in with your body. Is it ready to sit and be still and to receive for the next little while? If you're coming to this space with high energy or low energy, just be mindful of it. And if it feels good to you, you can begin by just feeling into your body. What is your relationship to support? How do your clothes feel on your body? Do you feel any sensations or needs? Any tingling or pangs of hunger, thirst? Check in with your sense of taste. Is there anything lingering from lunch, breakfast, a beverage maybe? Take a nice deep breath in. What do you smell in the air around you? Not judging, seeing if it's pleasant or unpleasant, just recognizing it. How about anything that you hear in the immediate vicinity or farther away? And now finally take a look around. Notice the space where you are. Connect with something living that's outside your window or in your space. And if you're ready, and if it feels good to you, I invite you to close your eyes or just softly gaze into the distance. We're going to begin taking a breath for the day we've had so far. Inhale. And on the exhale, let it all go. We're going to take a breath for this present moment, which cannot be recreated. Inhale. And on the exhale, release it. And we're going to take a breath for the day that is to come. Inhale. And let it all go on the exhale. Offer yourself a reminder that this time is worthwhile. You chose it for a reason. Remember that in giving to others, we can give to ourselves doubly. And remember that you are free to take what is offered here if it serves you, and leave anything that does not. One final breath in, and one final exhale. You can blink open your eyes, and we'll get started. We're going to get into just a little bit of housekeeping. The main bulk of the information on attunement and autonomy survival styles. There will be some invitations at the end to work with your own capacity for self-care. And I'll talk briefly about how you can take what you've integrated from this session into next steps. This was part of my sales page, so we will be getting into what we do to ourselves, how the education system reinforces that self-sacrificing behavior. We're going to engage in some imaginative practices to envision other ways of being. And we're going to talk about how we can receive more fulfillment, aliveness, joy, as we take these infinitesimal steps forward based on what we've imagined. So I'll probably be much less than 90 minutes since this is not interactive, but there will be chances for you to engage with the material as we go. Feel free to take body breaks as needed and to take care of yourselves as we go. So chances are you are here because you identified with something in this bullet point. You're probably exhausted trying to do everything that's expected of you. And you're ready to learn why it's so fucking hard to put your needs first without immediately feeling guilty or like you're letting others down or that you don't have a right to get your needs met. Take a moment and imagine what at the end of this time you hope to gain. This is how I feel on a daily basis. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why. Hi, my name is Carrie Rohrbach-Myers, and I am so many things. I've listed a whole bunch of them on this slide, but of course, a slide only tells part of the story, the part that I have decided to share. And these are all things that are important parts of who I am, who I've been, and who I am yet to be. So a little bit about me is that I was a classroom French teacher in public and private schools for 13 plus years. I have tutored since I was in college. I have babysat since I was far too young. I have a dog. I have a wonderful partner. And I have taken on so many different roles as an educator. The reason I list all these other identifiers and adjectives to describe myself is because I have allowed myself to be something other than just an educator for the last 13 plus years of my life. One thing that's really important to me is being a performer. And I realized that in being a classroom educator, I was performing a role and have taken that outside of the classroom and onto the stage. I also identify as a witch, and this is a pretty new and vulnerable share for me because some people hear this and immediately get skeptical. But what I want to tell you that has served me is that magic has come into my life as a chance for me to reconnect with myself, with the natural rhythms of life, so that I can better support myself for growth. After leaving the classroom, I started a business called Empowering Educator, and it has gone through a couple of different iterations. It has been one-off workshops. It has been one-on-one coaching. It has been group coaching. I'm working on a pilot program right now with a school virtually, and I am developing a summer container for educators as well. And everything that I'm trying to do is with the goal of providing support to teachers in ways that will allow them to stay in the classroom. I believe that all of the reasons we go into educating are noble and wonderful, and that there's another whole part of this story that needs to be told, which is that the teachers are not okay. And I would like to be at the forefront of teaching teachers how to be okay and how to take care of themselves so that they can better take care of their communities. I'm going to read something that is on my website that you are free to read as well, but it is important to me that you hear my land acknowledgement and privilege acknowledgement. Empowering Educator condemns all forms of societal and structural racism that are aimed toward Asian, Black, Latin, Indigenous, and other communities of color. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Nisenan people and other unrecognized tribes, present day known as Sacramento, California. We commemorate those who lost their lives to genocides past and present, including the people of African descent who were enslaved and brought to this land. Empowering Educator welcomes open minds and hearts as we continue to unlearn racism, sexism, ableism, classism, ageism, and homophobia, list non-exhaustive. And we acknowledge that we exist in a culture structured around white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, and that because I present as a white, able-bodied, straight, cisgender woman, I have privilege within this society as we know it today. And our intention is to continually work to dismantle these oppressive systems by empowering educators to realistically identify their understanding of themselves, the world, and their place in it, and claim self-agency where possible to center their own mental, emotional, social, spiritual, and physical wellness. And it is my firm belief that by taking back power over our own self-care, we can co-create our lives with what is offered to us. And that is how we can dismantle and disrupt these systems of oppression. Realistically, we have to understand that systems are very, very hard to change when they've been so ingrained. But what we can do is change our relationship to them. These were some bullet points on my sales page about who I believe to be the right type of person for this workshop. So we're going to be talking through our challenges with boundaries, with putting off self-care, with feeling resentful when others engage in it, when we can't actually know or don't actually know what we need. And even when we do have opportunities to care for ourselves, we have a hard time. This is a process that is inquiry-based, not goal-oriented. So we want to be open, we want to be imaginative, and we want to think about what could be possible. Think about what it might be like if you could center your own needs first, and how it would affect your relationship to your students, your family, their family, your colleagues, administration, the communities in which you work and live. And just by imagining, it's a powerful first step towards creating a trauma-informed educational model that empowers educators. And we'll get into all of these wonderful ways that we can care for ourselves in the different forms of wellness. I want to just do a little caveat that it's important to understand that trauma repair is hard work, and it involves a commitment to disruption and unlearning. And if you're here hoping that this workshop will solve all your problems, if you don't see how systems of oppression keep you and those around you stuck, or if you're not willing to let go of the way you are currently doing things, even if they're not serving you, then this might not be the right workshop for you. In which case, you are free to stop watching at any time. So my intentions for this workshop is to better understand ourselves and to invite the possibility of change. Sit with this question for a moment. What does wellness mean for you? And what do you want for yourself when it comes to your mental or cognitive or intellectual wellness, your social or relational, your partnership wellness, your emotional wellness, your physical wellness, and your spiritual needs? And now I want you to take a moment and inventory the ways in which you provide support and nurturing to yourself. And if it's a short list, that's okay. We're realistically and honestly looking at where we are so that we can shift to where we want to be in terms of getting our needs met. Just sit with this question for a moment. What would it feel like to actually listen to and honor your physical, cognitive, emotional, relational, and spiritual states each and every day? So now that we have invited the intention for change, we've reflected on what we most want for ourselves. Now we're going to explore some internal obstacles, or what is getting in the way of what you most want for yourself. After, we're going to get into how we are relating to our patterns that are in the way of what we most want for ourselves. And finally, we are going to explore what it's like to shift these old patterns to new ways of relating for intentions for ourselves. In this section, we're going to talk about how adverse childhood experiences have led to disconnection from what we most want for ourselves. And that is the definition of trauma. And my intention in sharing this information is not to focus on the disconnection, but to shed light on it so that we can better understand why reconnection is so challenging. And I want to preface by reminding you that I have a background in education, not psychotherapy. And while I am training to be a trauma-informed professional, my role here is not to be an expert or to offer any diagnoses. I encourage you to take care of yourself during this time if any big responses come up, and use it as an opportunity to better understand where you need tending. This is not a goal-oriented workshop that's focused on fixing. It's an inquiry-based workshop that supports connection. And my hope is that you become experts on your own internal world. So I'm going to spend just a brief moment talking about the difference between shock trauma and developmental or complex trauma. Generally, we hear about trauma in the terms of post-traumatic stress disorder, where we have a stimulus and very quickly through a fear-based response have to react to the threat. This generally comes as a mortal threat that we respond from a place of automaticity and saving ourselves. Complex trauma or developmental trauma is not a cause and response or a cause and effect. It is consistent long-term exposure to relational and emotional trauma in which an individual has little or no agency or control, and from which there's little or no hope of escape or helplessness. And this happens throughout our childhood in the process of discovering who we are. So as we are organizing ourselves into the self that we are to be, there have been messages or misconnections or avoidances or withholding of certain relational and emotional needs that has left us feeling like we cannot achieve what we want in our lives. And our hope through this process is to understand a little better about where the shame comes in, how the helplessness keeps us stuck, and how we can develop agency to get out of this pattern. And this is just a reminder that trauma can't be prevented in life. We need to meet the consequences of reality and the pain that comes with that. Many of us grew up in loving families where all of our basic needs were met, so we don't feel like anything bad enough happened to us to constitute trauma. And this is just a gentle reminder that our parents are humans too, and they have their own capabilities for relational and emotional support that may not have been adequate for them. Therefore, they are not adequate for us to be able to have navigated big feelings and make any sense of them. And for some of us, experiences of not being listened to, being told that only certain emotions or expressions of sentiment were okay, or being fixed as a child, were causes for disconnection from our core needs and primary emotions. Through the training that I am doing to be a trauma-informed professional, I am learning through the NARM Institute, which stands for the Neuroaffective Relational Model. So you'll see that some of the sources that I have here come from that training. In order to survive early trauma, a child disconnects from their core needs and feelings, which leads to disorganization and fragmentation of the self. This is otherwise known as developing a child consciousness that comes from the place of little or no hope, so helplessness, and little or no control, no agency. What happens is, as a result of disconnection, we have used survival strategies to adapt to our environments. And the idea here is that we are going to support connection to ourselves and others, which will lead to an increase in organization of the self, which will bring us into an adult consciousness. So the ways we adapted to these environments set the stage for us to not get our needs met and propelled us into a profession where this is considered a strength. Environmental and attachment failures led to repeated disconnection, which is why we have compromised core capacities and our default emotions. This is a gentle reminder that you are no longer a child with little or no control, which means you have agency or the power to make new choices. We are shifting your hopeless child consciousness to one of hopeful adult consciousness. And you may be thinking, why are we talking about our childhood trauma? And it's because trauma is not about what happened to us in the past. It's in the adaptations to past experiences that we carry forward these responses through these adaptive survival styles. And these are styles of disconnection in response to attachment or environmental failure, which occur on cognitive, behavioral, emotional, somatic, relational, and spiritual levels, which is why we talk about all forms of wellness when we talk about getting our needs met. And they can be referred to as expressions of the disorganization of the self. And while we won't be focusing on past traumas in this limited workshop, we are aiming to understand how the typical adaptive survival styles that present themselves in educators are keeping us from accessing what we most want in our lives by honoring all of our needs. This is a compassionate reminder that you aren't broken. There's nothing to be fixed, and that you have done the best you can with what you know. I want to offer some gentleness around this feeling of shame that comes up when we think about what is wrong with us. And this is your opportunity to begin to see a new way forward. We're going to explore two types of survival strategies, attunement and autonomy. And these both seem to be most aligned with the types of people who tend to become educators. We went into this profession because we're caregivers, we are kind, we are open-hearted, usually at the expense of tending to our own needs or setting boundaries. And there are 5 adaptive survival strategies, so I encourage you to do some research into the other ones if they interest you. The too long didn't read version of this is that due to developmental trauma, children learn to give up their own needs in order to focus on the needs of others, particularly the needs of their caregivers. This was reinforced throughout childhood and still presents when these individuals go into caregiving roles, thinking that is how they inadvertently get their needs met. These individuals often end up as an inhibited person who is proud of how little they need and how much they can do without, or they end up as the unsatisfied person who won't express their needs and develops a tendency to be left with a chronic sense of being unfulfilled. The too long didn't read version of this is that due to developmental trauma, children learn to give up direct expressions of independence in order not to feel abandoned or crushed. This was reinforced throughout childhood when children would superficially go along with their caregiver's program for them, while holding hidden resentment. This shows up today in people-pleasing tendencies at the expense of our own expressions of integrity and autonomy. And this is particularly pervasive with educators who link their worth with duty, burden, and bondage. No wonder we have had such a hard time getting our needs met. We have learned since very young ages that if we express our needs or authenticity, we will lose connection with our caregivers. We closed up access to our primary emotions, or ones that support increasing connection to ourselves, in order to reinforce disconnection with default emotions that have become automatic reactions from a place of consciousness, child consciousness. And I want to take a moment to hold some space for whatever grief may come up from this realization. The good news is that this opens the possibility of change. When we better understand ourselves, we can unlearn ways we've kept ourselves from experiencing fulfillment and slowly create a new way of being. Now that we are aware of the limited capacity of our child consciousness, we can proceed with agency and hopefulness so we can fully live in the here and now and change our relationship with wellness and self-care. I'm going to take off my supportive educator cap and put on my angry educator one. The insurmountable amount of pressure that is put on educators today is inhumane. Most of us go into this profession because we love the kids. We had a caregiver or teacher in our life who put us on this path, or we really felt the call to educate in a different way than how we were taught. That curiosity and drive for knowledge, connection, and joy should be at the center of everything we do. We should be free to create and ideate, make mistakes, and collaborate. We go into our degree and certification programs knowing that there will be long hours, angry parents, and unhelpful administration. And we get it done because we are goddamn professionals who are worthy of care, respect, and rest. But because we live in a society where capitalism has told us that our productivity defines our worth, where the tenets of white supremacy in the form of perfectionism, sense of urgency, paternalism run rampant, because the patriarchy decided that teaching was a woman's work and therefore not worthy of proper attention and funding. These self-sacrificing values are reinforced and ingrained even deeper in us. This means that even if we have the best intentions of changing to allow for more fulfillment, there are very real systemic barriers to doing so, and even more so if we hold less privilege than others in society. While we have to be aware of the very real systemic barriers to what we want for ourselves, by reclaiming our right to be cared for, we can subvert a system that is built on the unpaid labor of educators. It is my most fervent hope that by dismantling internalized capitalism, internalized white supremacy, and internalized patriarchy through better self-care, that we can transform the communities and systems that have held us hostage for too long. So now that we've learned a little bit about what our barriers are to accessing self-care, now we have to consider what our relationship to these barriers are. So if we think about what we really want for ourselves, we think about our relationship to giving support and nurturing to ourselves, and our patterns of not fulfilling ourselves, we're going to just consider how that plays out in our minds for a moment. So this middle part will look a little familiar with the stimulus, organizing self, and response. In experiencing developmental trauma, there's not one isolating incident that we can point to that is the reason we do the things we do. These patterns were developed by threats to our ability to develop attunement to our own needs and express those needs without feeling guilt or shame. And the reason I can't just tell you to do something differently is because the patterns have been reinforced by this cycle of disconnection and rejection of one's core needs, emotions, and other internal states of organization. This keeps us stuck in this loop of what some people call self-sabotaging behavior, but what I am rebranding as protective behavior. For example, I know that for my personal physical well-being, I like to practice yoga daily. So in going through the thought exercise of what is my relationship to my pattern that keeps me from what I really want, I'm going to give you an example. I decided to join a 30-day yoga challenge, and I put the pressure on myself to complete the challenge every single day. But what inevitably happens a few days in, I miss a day and forget about it. What's the point? If I can't do it perfectly, why did I try at all? I should have known I would never complete this. I never complete anything. This is why I can't have what I want. Sound familiar? This is a familiar pattern that we have run on loop since childhood. Our intention is to become aware of our relationship with these patterns that keep us from what we really want for ourselves. And of course, we would like to move from this left cycle of disconnection, shame, and self-hatred to the right cycle of reconnection and self-acceptance. But again, we're not working with a goal in mind. We're just working with curiosity and grace for the fact that we are human and we make mistakes. And just like we tell our students all the time, it takes consistent practice to learn. And in our case, it takes even more practice to unlearn how we've been unconscious to the way these patterns keep us from experiencing the joy and fulfillment that we want. No amount of thinking can get us to feeling safe. If we could think our way into finding more joy, curiosity, and fulfillment, in other words, love, we would have done it by now. The task is to slowly uncover all of these barriers to receiving love, acceptance, and fulfillment, and removing them through constant titration, which I will illustrate by talking about our window of tolerance. So we have to think about our relationship to receiving care and how sometimes it doesn't feel safe to receive. So if you take a moment and think about an opportunity you have to have your needs met, cognitively, relationally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. Notice if you reject, deflect, defer, or can't commit to these chances. The reason for this is because feeling good doesn't feel safe in our bodies. The window of tolerance is where we feel the most nervous system regulation, smooth sailing. Normal stressors come and go, and you're able to function within this zone. Generally, when something causes dysregulation, for example, an unexpected disruption to your day, you'll default to a trauma response that aligns with your history. You may respond with defensiveness in fight mode. You may avoid the problem by fleeing. You may have decision paralysis and freeze. Or you may defer to what someone else thinks is best, which is called fawn mode and isn't included on this graphic. Now, this graphic is generally used to describe how we respond to stressors that have a negative impact on our well-being. But I also see it as a reminder that we respond to all things in this way, not just the quote unquote bad ones. So in order to grow our window of tolerance for all the good things in life, we can develop more capacity to attune to and express our needs. This means we can't just have one massage and everything goes away. Or the bottle of wine that you get on a Friday, possibly from your administration or on the way home. It may seem to have a rainbow on the other side of it, but we know that you need to slowly introduce good things into our lives so that we can pull from this resource to feel more goodness. Just like we have a window of tolerance for feeling stress, we also have a window of tolerance for feeling good. Titration is the idea of taking highly emotional material, such as actually getting our needs met, one manageable piece at a time. Otherwise, we will respond to offers for our needs to be met in the same way we respond to stress: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So this is an example of how we default to emotions that reinforce disconnection from ourselves and our needs, rather than expressing primary emotions that are authentic and spontaneous expressions of our inner experience. Now, there's a lot going on in this graphic, and we're just going to focus on the left two columns that display what happens with the developmental trauma alongside the adaptive survival styles. So most of us who've gone into the field of education have done so because we had a compromised attunement to ourself and have chronically unmet needs. It's important to recognize that we can't go from this place of dissociation, isolation, physical symptoms, helplessness, fear, and shame immediately to expansion, aliveness, and self-expression. Our window of tolerance is too small for that, which is why when we recognize our patterns, our relationship to the patterns of self-sabotage or protection, we see that every time they will attack and disrupt any movement towards increased life energy because it's perceived as a threat. We want to stay small and safe and sane, and good is new and scary. Our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems are caught in this loop of freeze, acting in or out, splitting or projecting anger or rage. And we need to gradually work toward expressing our needs, embracing our strength, and displaying healthy aggression against how we used to be wired to respond. And this is a gentle reminder that we work with intention, curiosity, and agency to shift these patterns of self-rejection toward greater self-acceptance. This is how we can get back into our primary emotions that reinforce a sense of self-agency, greater flow, expansion, pleasure, and aliveness. So now we'll just take a moment and consider what it would be like to shift your relationship to these patterns that keep you from feeling joy, fulfillment, and receive love, care, and nurturing from yourself without guilt, without shame. Now we'll just do this orally since we're not in the gather space together. You can write this down or just reflect on it. At the beginning, we talked about what we want for ourselves in terms of getting our cognitive, emotional, relational, physical, and spiritual needs met. So if you already have that written down somewhere, you can refer back to it. And if you'd like to take a moment to write down something new, now's the time. I'll give you a brief example. For instance, I love to read. So every day I would like cognitively to stretch my brain and have time to read for pleasure. What would it be like to get that need met if I actually set the time every single day to read for pleasure? What would that do for my intellectual, mental, and cognitive needs? And then I think to myself, well, what's currently in place that can support this possibility of getting this cognitive need met? Is it waking up 30 minutes early to read in bed before I get out and ready for my day? Is it going to bed 20 minutes earlier to read just before bed? Is it to set a random timer on my phone and just, no matter what, if I'm during my planning period or during lunch or after school, just sit and read for 5 minutes? And you'll do the same thing with your emotional needs. For instance, I love to cry. So what would it be like to let myself cry every day? And how could I do that with what's currently going on in my life? Getting my relational needs met. I have an ongoing Marco Polo thread with lots of good girlfriends, and talking with them daily makes me feel better. So what would it be like to spend time every day responding and recording videos on Marco Polo? And what's possible to make that happen? I already spoke about my physical needs with my daily yoga practice. And in terms of spirituality, this is just our place in the world. What is our bigger purpose? And for me, magic is a big part of that. So every day I like to pull tarot cards. I like to cast runes. I like to weave spells. I like to know what's going on in the astrological plane. And what would it be like to be able to do that every single day? And how could I do that? What's currently in place to support that possibility? Feel free to pause this if you want to spend more time here. Now, this is where your imagination comes back in. Think about what is one shift that could bring you closer to what you want for yourself in terms of all these forms of wellness. Imagine what it would be like, who you could be, and how that will impact the world. It's important in this process that we build self-trust to become a caregiver to ourselves. We want to move against striving and remind ourselves that we're not responsible for becoming good. This isn't an overnight fix. And we need relational safety to be able to move out of these survival patterns and closer to what we want for ourselves. And I'll just remind you to engage in this process every day of what it would feel like to actually listen to and honor your needs. Thank you so much for spending some time here with me today. Technology be damned. I hope this has recorded and it's gonna go up on YouTube. I would love to continue to connect with you. I will be announcing a summer container for educators in which we will more closely work on these specific patterns and adaptive survival strategies over a 14-week period. It will include some guided and self-paced instruction, some accountability huddles, some one-on-one and group coaching. And I'll be sending more information as it's ready. But since you have engaged with this material and in the interest of trauma-informed care, you are free to continue engaging with this material or set boundaries and unsubscribe at any time if this no longer serves you. So I just want to say thank you for tuning in, for taking this time for yourself. And I look forward to continuing to support you on this journey back to yourself.